He's only been in North Korea a few hours, and Russia's President Vladimir Putin and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un have signed a treaty beneficial to both nations. The comprehensive strategic agreement provides for mutual help in the event of any possible aggression against both countries. But before leaders signed the deal, South Korea had hinted it received intelligence that the two countries would sign agreements on military cooperation, prompting Seoul to warn Russia against going beyond a certain point. This, however, did not stop the duo from beefing up their security agreement. President Putin was welcomed to vibrant fanfare by thousands of North Koreans.
This is the moment Russian President Vladimir Putin touched down in North Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un welcomes his Russian counterpart upon his arrival. Cheers, celebrations and military parades fill the Kim Il-sung Square to honor the Russian leader who's visiting the country for the second time in 24 years. He last visited in September year 2000. Both leaders attend the welcome ceremony, giving the Russian president time to unwind and pay greetings to Pyongyang officials. Ahead of diplomatic talks, both presidents, dressed in black, pose for a joint photograph. It's straight to business, as Mr. Putin lauds relations between both countries, emphasizing the strong friendship and cooperation based on the principles of equality and mutual respect for each other's interests.
We deeply appreciate your consistent and unwavering support for Russia's policy, including on the Ukrainian issue. Thanks to the dedicated efforts of the Korean people under your leadership.
Host leader, on the other hand, describes President Putin's visit as a historic moment in the Korea-Russia relations.
Comrade President Putin's visit to Pyongyang proves the joyful nature of the Korea-Russia relations, which have entered a period of the greatest development, and at the same time is a great historic moment of the most important, notable, strategic significance in the history of Korea-Russia relations.
Russia and North Korea then signed an agreement that provides for mutual help in the event of aggression against either country. Speaking at a one-on-one meeting after signing the treaty, Mr. Kim notes that North Korea will respond without hesitation to incidents or wars facing his country or Russia. He adds the treaty will accelerate the creation of a multipolar world where no dominant country can wield hegemonic power. Meanwhile, Mr. Putin indicates Russia does not rule out developing the military technical cooperation with North Korea. He also called for the indefinite restrictive regime inspired by the United States and its allies at the United Nations Security Council towards North Korea to be reviewed. Speaking of the West, the US and South Korea, which vowed to closely monitor the visit, accuses the North of supplying Russia with artillery ammunition in exchange for supplies and military aid. Following the meeting, both leaders lay flowers at monuments to honor slain Soviet soldiers in Pyongyang. While the Russian president enjoys his tour of the North, a gala concert was not left out. President Kim Jong-un declared that the relationship between North Korea and Russia has upgraded to the new level of alliance.
We've seen both leaders in unusual light, especially in front of the cameras. They've been acting like best of friends since President Putin stepped into Pyongyang, including going on a separate ride together with President Putin as the driver. President Putin presented his North Korean counterpart with a Russian-built Urus limousine, a tea set and an admiral's dirk. Kim Jong-un then presented his friend with various works of art depicting himself, including busts. President Putin then took Mr. Kim for a spin on the new automobile. While the rest of the world watched the bromance between Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un, the United States accused Russia, China, Iran and North Korea of providing weapons to Russia, aiding its war on Ukraine. This was relayed by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who was speaking at a joint news conference with NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. Mr. Stoltenberg echoed the U.S. Secretary of State's concerns, saying NATO alliance are concerned about North Korea's and Russia's military capabilities. Mr. Stoltenberg, who had met with U.S. President Joe Biden hours before at the White House, had announced defense spending across European allies and Canada is up 18%, the biggest in decades. He also confirmed that 23 allies will meet the target of spending at least 2% of GDP on defense.
North Korea is providing significant munitions to Russia and other weapons for use in Ukraine. Iran has been providing weaponry, including drones that have been used against civilians and civilian infrastructure. And as I mentioned a moment ago, the deep concerns we have about China, not in terms of providing weapons, but in providing what Russia needs to keep its defense industrial base going and to produce itself more tanks, more munitions, more missiles. Yes, these are the countries of concern. And with regard to China in particular, as I've said before, it can't, on the one hand, say that it wants better relations with countries in Europe, while at the same time fueling the biggest security threat to Europe as a whole since the end of the Cold War. So if China in particular, which professes to have a strong interest in ending the war, if it really means it, it will stop fueling the war machine. And we'll continue to do everything we can to cut off the support that countries like Iran and North Korea are providing.
We are, of course, also concerned about the potential support that Russia provides to North Korea when it comes to supporting their missile and nuclear programs. We see how much military support Russia gets from North Korea, but also from Iran, and how China is propping up their war economy. And this is also one of the reasons why at NATO and at the NATO summit here in Washington next month, we will further strengthen our partnership with our partners in the Asia-Pacific region, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea and Japan, also to address the fact that the challenges they see, we see in Asia and Asia-Pacific are directly linked to the challenges we face in Europe.
In the meantime, a U.S. soldier has been sentenced by a Russian court to 3 years and 9 months in jail on charges of theft. The man, identified as Sergeant Gordon Black, is expected to serve time in a penal colony. He was arrested in May. He was also charged with threatening to murder his partner, a crime he had pleaded not guilty to. He did admit, however, that he was partially guilty of stealing 10,000 rubles from her. According to officials, the 34-year-old who met his girlfriend in South Korea says he will appeal the verdict. Prosecutors had called for him to be jailed for 4 years and 8 months, while his defense asked for him to be acquitted. He enlisted as an infantryman in 2008 and was deployed to Iraq in 2009 and Afghanistan in 2013. The U.S. Army says Sergeant Black did not request official clearance, and the Defense Department did not authorize his travel to Russia or China, where he had traveled to first on his way back from South Korea. Russia is holding other Americans behind bars. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich has been in jail since March 2023, while former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan was sentenced to 16 years in prison in 2020. The United Nations is calling a need for global support if the war in Ukraine persists. UN officials condemn Russia's wave of attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, reiterating a need for the hostilities to end immediately. They also urge Moscow to come to the negotiating table and seek constructive dialogue in order to end the war.
We once again stress that attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure are prohibited by international law. They must stop immediately. The longer the war continues, the greater the need for this global solidarity and support. The large-scale attacks by the Russian Federation against energy infrastructure have reduced Ukraine's energy-generating capacity by 68%. Periodic strikes imperiling the critical power supply to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant have also continued. Any attacks involving nuclear facilities are extremely dangerous and irresponsible. They must cease immediately. The 2024 Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan is currently 27% funded. We urge our donors to sustain their generous financial support. This will allow us to continue to deliver life-saving assistance to the vulnerable population. Over 80% of global trade is by sea. The Black Sea is a critical route, estimated to account for over a quarter of grain trade. Much more needs to be done to mitigate risks, reduce transaction costs, and bring more stability in global agricultural markets. The UN has therefore highlighted the importance of stabilizing critical trade routes for agricultural products.
We must urge Russia to come to the table ready for constructive, fair dialogue. But we must also ensure Ukraine is at the head of that table and in the strongest possible position. Any discussion about a negotiated settlement is, at its core, a discussion about Ukraine's future. A sovereign Ukraine should be the party leading these discussions, period. All of us would expect the same if we were in Ukraine's position. To that end, we regret that, adding insult to injury, China released its own quote-unquote peace plan, one formulated without any buy-in from Ukraine itself. If China is genuinely interested in supporting the peace process, we would welcome its help. It can start by ending its support to Russia's defense industrial base. Without the substantial quantities of machine tools, microelectronics, optics, and UAV and cruise missile technology provided by China, Russia would struggle to sustain its war of aggression.